And so Hal was nice enough to log in. And Hal, if you want to just briefly introduce yourself and your involvement with the port and the project, and love to hear an update on what you're seeing in Washington, D.C. You might be on.
Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, I was on mute.
There you go.
Appreciate the opportunity to talk with you and with all the folks on the phone and on the Zoom call today. Many of you are familiar to me. Others, I've heard names for a very long time. Senator King, thank you for your continued support on the Hood River, Klickitat, White Salmon Bridge. It's really important and been very helpful at the state legislative level and also at the federal level, because the senators do pay attention to that, as does Representative Herrera Butler. But some of you I have not had the opportunity to talk with before, so nice to see you. Summit Strategies is a small government relations firm that's based actually in Portland, Oregon. But we have a larger number of employees here in Washington, D.C. and focus very much on the federal level. And I've been working with the port for probably more than 20 years on a variety of transportation projects. But the last several years, of course, the focus has been primarily on replacement of the Hood River White Salmon Interstate Bridge. I will spend a few, I don't want to take too much time today, but I do want to give you a quick update on what's happening at the federal level with all the infrastructure debate that I'm sure you're reading about and hearing about on NPR and reading about in your local newspapers and on your media feed, because there's a lot going on infrastructure. And I'll start with the Senate, because the Senate Environment and Public Works passed its reauthorization bill out of committee right before Memorial Day, and it passed a bill that was about $311 billion, and it was very focused on highways and bridges, because that's what the jurisdiction of the Environment and Public Works Committee is. So in the Senate, there are 4 different committees that deal with transportation reauthorization, and one of those is EPW, and then there's the Transit Committee that's out of a banking committee. There's Commerce Committee with Senator Cantwell chairs, and that's more focused on freight and trucking related issues, some safety related issues, and then there's finance. So in the Senate, it's all kind of split up among a number of different committees. But the Environment and Public Works Committee has completed their bill in committee, and it includes a significant amount of funding for new bridge investment. It's a $3.265 billion program, a new bridge program, which could potentially be incredibly helpful for the replacement of this bridge. And then there's also a $2 billion rural surface transportation grant program. So those are 2 specific programs that have pretty significant funding levels in them that, if they survive the whole legislative process, would be good targets for us to potentially go after some dedicated funding for the bridge replacement effort. The Senate has not included specific projects yet in the Senate Surface Transportation Bill. We do anticipate that at some point they will. And that is a bit in a response to the House Transportation Reauthorization Bill, which does include specific projects. And the House got bogged down in all of those project requests. When the House and Senate were working on very similar timelines, but when the House went ahead and asked for specific project recommendations, they found that they got so many requests from both Democratic and Republican members of the House that it really bogged down and probably put them a month behind going through all of those project requests. So they didn't actually mark up their bill until last week. But the Senate went right before Memorial Day, and does have some specific opportunities for programmatic opportunities for bridge funding. I don't anticipate that we'll get a bill through the Senate until probably the end of July, because those other committees have to do their part. And when that happens, if there's a Senate bill, it will probably be a bipartisan bill, because the bill coming out of the Environment and Public Works Committee was very bipartisan. It was unanimously passed out of the committee. And I think they'll continue on that tact all the way through in the Senate. So we'll have a bipartisan bill through the Senate probably by the end of July. That's my prediction. And it may not even at that point have projects included, specific earmarked projects for transportation projects. But when it comes to combining that bill with a House bill, I would be really surprised if the senators who are part of the conference committee don't come to that conference committee with projects in their hip pocket all of the other senators have recommended to them. So I don't think, even though we're not pending for the Hood River Bridge project as a specific earmark in the Senate bill, that process just hasn't played out yet. Let's shift to the House. So in the House, there are hundreds and hundreds of earmarked projects in the House Transportation Bill, which was passed last Thursday after a 19-hour, yes, that's right, 19-hour markup that was just an exhausting markup, but it included very specific projects in Oregon and in Washington. Unfortunately, the bridge project was not included. Each member of the House was was allocated essentially $20 million to determine how they wanted to spend $20 million on earmarked projects in their congressional district. And Jamie Herrera Butler, thanks to Klickitat County, did put in a $5 million request for the Hood River Bridge, and that was great. But she only got 3 projects in the final bill before it got out of committee, and that's because those 3 projects added up to $20 million. So there are 2 Longview projects and 1 project in Woodland, Washington, which is a big interchange project, which was $11 million earmark. So she spent her $20 million before she could get to the $5 million request for the Hood River White Salmon Interstate Bridge. Unfortunately, on the Oregon side, Cliff Bentz, the new representative from the 2nd Congressional District, chose not to submit any requests for projects for either appropriation projects or for reauthorization projects. So we didn't have a chance to actually be pending on the Oregon side, which was disappointing, but that was the way he chose to participate in the process. And so it will be up to the senators now, when we get these 2 bills, the House bill and the Senate bill, eventually to conference, probably in August or September, it will be up to the senators, Senator Murray and Cantwell and Wyden and Merkley, to push for earmarked funding for the Hood River Bridge project, if in fact the bridge has specific earmarked funding in the bill. And I think they'll have an opportunity to do that, but so far that process has not become entirely clear. You've also heard a lot of discussion, I'm sure, in the press about bipartisan infrastructure negotiations that might be going on, or negotiations between the White House and Republican senators in the Senate, in the U.S. Senate. And there's been a lot of smoke, but not very much result that's been clear up till now. And I'm not sure where that's all going to lead. What Chairman DeFazio, who's from Eugene, who's the chairman of the House Transportation Committee, has decided to do is just plow ahead with his reauthorization bill, because he's just not sure where those White House and bipartisan negotiations on a really big infrastructure negotiation are headed. And he says he wants to get the policy in place, and if the White House is successful in negotiating a bipartisan big infrastructure bill, that's great. But in the meantime, he's focused on a reauthorization bill. And I think the Senate EPW committee is pretty much following that same strategy, because they see that they hope to have a final reauthorization bill negotiated by September 30, which is when the current reauthorization runs out. And if the White House and Congress are able to negotiate a much bigger infrastructure package, that's a separate issue. And they're focused on reauthorization of the current surface transportation bill. And in the House, that's called the INVEST Act. In the Senate, it's called the Surface Transportation Reauthorization Act, very simple reauthorization bill. And I think there's a pretty good chance that we will see a surface transportation reauthorization bill. I have less confidence that we'll see a big $1 trillion infrastructure package. We'll see where that goes, but happy to talk about that or the House or Senate transportation reauthorization efforts. I think we're pretty good. We're positioned pretty well. The port and the Oregon delegation have been talking about the Hood River White Salmon Bridge for a number of years, both to the Oregon delegation as well as Senator Murray and Senator Cantwell. Jamie Herrera Butler, she knows the project well. Really appreciate those of you from Washington State that are meeting with her and lobbying in calls to her staff, because I think that's really helpful. The project is seen as a bi-state project, and that's important because the Northwest delegation is actually positioned pretty well to be helpful. Peter DeFazio is chairman of the House Transportation Committee. Of course, Maria Cantwell is chair of the Commerce, which is going to mark up its portion of the reauthorization bill this Wednesday. Senator Merkley and Senator Murray are both on the Appropriations Committee, and so have opportunities to add some specific earmarked funding now that Congress is back in the earmark game. So, and of course, Senator Murray is a very senior member of the Democratic Party. So I think we're in good shape from a seniority perspective, and it's important that all of us continue to emphasize the bridge. And one of the things that's easy to emphasize with this bridge is the bi-state enthusiasm for this bridge, and the fact that you're moving forward and are getting close to a record of decision, when in fact that other bi-state interstate bridge has a lot of problems. And we don't need to focus on that, but they're certainly aware that this project is the success story, and the other one is the one that gives everyone headaches. And so we want to stay on that success side. So happy to answer any questions.
Senator King, do you want to, is there anything there that caught your interest?
Well, I very much appreciate the update. I was at an event for Representative Newhouse last I don't know, Wednesday or Thursday, somewhere in there, and got a chance to talk to him for 5 minutes, and I asked him about what he thought was happening, and he referenced the group of 10 and their work, trying to work with President Biden, and he held out hope that might be a little more successful than the previous effort by one of the senators, I believe. But I had a chance to talk to him about the Hood River Bridge and stress the fact that just what you had said, that we had good agreement with the Oregon and Washington side, that everybody was working well together and trying to keep that focus, that we had monies available from both Oregon, the state of Oregon and the state of Washington, that we hoped would keep moving us forward. So I very much appreciate your report. I will do my best to try and send off a note or a request to Senator Cantwell and Senator Murray's staff on behalf of Hood River and keep the focus there. And to your point, I think the fact that it is bipartisan, that is bi-state, that all of these things are playing in our favor, because as you point out, there are other problems further further down the river, I guess, but that's a whole different story. I was very pleased with the response I got from him. Plan to follow up with a note just to re-emphasize all of that. And just we're working on the Washington side. There are still strong efforts being pushed to come up with a transportation package for the state of Washington. And my desire and hope is that we're going to try and get 150 million or a little more into that budget or that package, so that that money will be there when it's needed, sooner rather than later. And then I'll quit with I got a call from DOT, the regional director, in regards to how that $5 million that we had in this session's budget would be transmitted. We've talked with one of the commissioners from Klickitat, and he has talked to the board. And at this point in time, there's going to be obviously some paperwork that's going to need to be done, but we're trying to minimize that. And I think the plan is that that 5 million would go to DOT or through DOT, and possibly very quickly through Klickitat. Somehow they probably will never see it, but we're going to get their buy off, which I believe we have. The money will then be given to the state of Oregon, who will then give it to the Port Hood River, so that we can keep working on trying to get the EIS, or whatever the terms are that I always get screwed up, to see that we keep moving this forward. So that's really all I have to say. And Hal, I appreciate all your efforts, really do.
Well, thank you. And I can't tell you how excited I was, but how excited all the delegation on both sides of the river were to hear about the $5 million that the Washington State Legislature put in the budget for the bridge, because I think it shows real continued commitment, because Oregon State Legislature put in 5 million. Of course, there's the federal $5 million build grant, and now Washington State has put in the 5 million. And I think it does really show both by state support, but also continued interest and enthusiasm. And that's the message that I think we really want to continue to convey. And I'm glad that you spoke with Representative Newhouse. Of course, he knows his project, because his congressional district used to include come all the way down to White Salmon, and it got shifted. But he knows the project, and he's a pretty senior appropriator as well. So that's good to know. I'll circle back with Travis Martinez, his transportation staffer, now that you had that conversation. Thanks.
That's good.
I have a couple questions, but I want to see if there's any members of the working group that might. Commissioner Babbitts, you're on mute.
Thank you very much. I have a real quick question for Hal. Can you tell us your best guess as to what the balance will be in chunks of money that are available through earmarks versus scored programs?
Well, in reauthorization, the earmarks are going to be, each member that did request projects was allocated $20 million. And so the 4 Oregon members who asked, all each, including the chairman, received $20 million, and they spread it out differently. Representative Schrader, for instance, put all $20 million on one interchange on I-5, and DeFazio spread it all over his district. So those numbers are not likely to change going into conference, but what will change is that it's hard to imagine that senators will just say yes to all those House projects and not have their own list. And so what my best guess is that if you take, like, for instance, in Oregon has 5 congressional districts. They had $100 million available for earmarks. They earmarked 80 million because Vince didn't ask. But that would give Merkley and Wyden $100 million to work with if they're kind of going to have similar earmark levels in the Senate bill, and then they come together and decide if they want to add some additional projects or they want to plus up some of the other projects that are already in the House bill. That would be kind of up to the senators. And what is interesting in that process is that the conferees won't get terribly engaged in that. They'll say, tell us what you want, to the senators. In the same way, Chairman DeFazio said to all the different members, tell me what you want. Tell me how you want to spend $20 million. But my guess is that on the Senate side, there'll be probably about 100 million for the Oregon members. There are more congressional districts in Washington State. I can't remember off the top of my head how many there are. And that number would be a similar number to all the project numbers in the House for the Washington delegation.
So Hal, just following up on that. So for instance, the bill or the new build, whatever they're calling it now, plus the infra program, those are both scoring projects. Do you see those amounts being the same as in the past? I think maybe we had talked that if we got some engineering, that maybe a $75 million application to infra.
The bill that will get marked up on Wednesday of this week in the Commerce Committee by Senator Cantwell, that is the bill that reauthorizes both the infra program, and for the first time she's proposed to authorize what was called the build program. Now the Biden administration, for some odd reason, changed its name to RAISE. So now it's called the RAISE program, just to confuse everyone. The RAISE program is being authorized at 1.5 billion, and the infra program is being authorized at 1.2 billion annually. So those would be good targets for us to go after specific funding in a grant cycle. But my guess is that there will also be some fairly significant earmarked projects in the final conference bill. And there aren't really big earmarked projects in the bill now on the House side, but I know that Chairman DeFazio, because I've spoken to him a number of times about this, has a real interest in looking at significant projects of regional and national significance, and whether or not there would be an opportunity to earmark bigger chunks of money for those projects. So when individual members had $20 million to work with, most of them spread that among 4 or 5 projects. Representative Schrader was the exception, where he put all of it into one project. But 20 million isn't going to build the Hood River White Salmon Interstate Bridge, but a $75 million earmark in the projects of regional and national significance might be incredibly helpful, and would be incredibly helpful. So I know that Chairman DeFazio is looking at that PNRS program. It's authorized at $12 billion in the House bill. And it could just be authorized at $12 billion and they don't earmark it at all, or they could earmark a couple of $1 billion out of the 12. And so we'll have to see how that plays out. But we want to make sure that our messaging continues to say to the Oregon and Washington delegation members, as well as the senators, the House members, as well as the senators, that if there is any further earmarking of significant bridge projects, we want this project to be on.
Any other questions for Hal or Senator King?
This is Commissioner Chapman. I don't have a question, but Kevin, I just wanted to make sure, now that the port and the bi-state group have both kind of given its blessing to that document that Michael and you and everyone worked on, does Hal and Senator King and does all the people have that document to use in their talking points?
That's the project principles and objectives.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, I will be distributing that after this meeting. I can't remember if I sent it ahead of time, ahead of schedule, but I'll definitely make a note to send that out after this meeting. Question for you, Hal, and maybe this brings Senator King in. What can we do as a region, either from a letter writing campaign that includes our state level elected officials and our local elected officials and otherwise? What can we be doing or should we keep our powder dry as far as a big letter writing campaign to show the interest here locally?
Well, at the federal level, I'll let Senator King talk about the state level, but at the federal level, I think launching a new letter to the 4 senators, so the 2 Oregon, 2 Washington senators, reminding them about the project, emphasizing what Commissioner Chapman just emphasized, which are these principles and values. I think that it's a good reason to write the letter, but it's good timing to have a letter go into the 4 senators emphasizing the need for significant federal investment in this bridge, and having a lot of signatures from both the business community and the local governmental community on both sides of the river. I think that would be very helpful and gives them a lot of motivation and political cover to push forward on any kind of earmarking if they get the word from the committee that they want project recommendations from the senators.
Do you have a date, like a due date for me as far as a good drop dead as to when I should be getting that material to you?
End of this week, Kevin.
Oh, why should this week be any different?
That's right. No, I think, if we could get a letter to the congressional delegation before the 4th of July recess, I think that could be really helpful. And both the Senate and House go out for the 4th of July recess week, the Friday before the 4th of July. So what's that, the 2nd of July? So if we had a target of the 2nd of July, I'd be happy to work with you on a letter like that. And then you could put it out to all of your different contacts and see if we could generate a pretty significant sign-on letter. I think that could be very helpful. And a similar letter at the appropriate time would probably be useful for both Oregon and Washington legislatures, but Senator King would know the Washington process better than any of us, and the Oregon legislature is about ready to adjourn and they're not going to act on anything new right now. So I think the focus from my perspective would be on the federal level, because we're in the process of writing these bills.
And Hal, a question for you on that. Would it be helpful in that letter, not only to show a lot of support, but should we emphasize or not emphasize the recent weight reduction that is affecting a lot of businesses here mostly Washington, but also in Oregon?
Absolutely. Yeah, any new data points that show how critical it is to replace this bridge as soon as possible would be great.
Senator King, any thoughts on?
Yeah, I would just add, we obviously have adjourned for the year. As I say, there's still renewed interest in a package being put together. I would tell you that package has got a long way to go. I would say that I feel that the chair in the Senate would like me involved, and not that it's just me, but he has told me that he would like me to be part of whatever package is put together. I know that the House has said that if it's a D package, they may just have a D package, and there wouldn't be any Republican projects in there. Now, I know that I doubt that that's going to happen. We've never had a partisan transportation package in many years. I don't anticipate anybody wants to do that again, but it's the threat is there. And I will be talking with the chair in the House as well as the ranking member over the next 3 or 4 weeks to see where we're headed and where we think we might end up with a package. I also am planning on meeting this month with the majority leader in the Senate, see what he might get his thoughts on a package as well. But at this point, I think we're better off just to keep our powder dry, and at the appropriate time, then I think if it's needed, then we could start writing letters and doing the things that need to be done just to back up the need for whatever monies would be available on the bridge. So.
Great. Well, I'm sorry that this has been a really good discussion. I will just summarize very briefly on the Oregon side. Thorn Run Partners and myself, we have been meeting. We've met with all of the members of the Capital Construction Subcommittee of Ways and Means, and we met with all of the Ways and Means members, at least those that would meet with us. A couple of them, specifically Senator Betsy Johnson out of the Scappoose area. She's been very hard to pin down. However, when we tried to lobby in situ for a letter of support I guess about a month ago, they put us in touch with their government affairs individual with Boeing as a subsidiary of Boeing. So Rich White, who is their local government liaison, has attended some of the gorgeous night events in both Olympia and Salem. He got the word and says, since he's with Boeing, Senator Johnson takes his call all the time. So he put a nice phone call into Senator Johnson on the project's behalf, talking about the importance of the bridge to those workers at in situ and all of the other subsidiary businesses in the gorge. And so, and I believe port staff will be meeting with Rich next week as well. So as Senator King noted, the Oregon session is finishing up, I believe, June 27th. And all indications are that this will probably be the largest Christmas tree, quote unquote, bill maybe in the history of Oregon from what we're hearing. So other than that, that's all I've got on the Oregon side of the ledger, but thank you all. Any more questions for Hal or Senator King or myself on the Oregon side? All right, thank you very much. We do want to say, who's that?
This is Kate.
Yes.
I just have one question for Hal. Thank you, Senator King and Hal, for coming and updating us. Extremely appreciated all your time. And a question for you, Hal. So with all the things you talked about happening in the future, I was wondering when, when would we get an update of what potential, the earmarks are? Are we on a list? Are we on any of these lists? Would it be 3 months down the road, 6 months down the road? As we, work towards these things, when would the next drop dead cut lists and things like that be happening, or decisions?
Well, for the House Transportation Bill, if you're not on the list now, you're not going to be added, because they're not going to add lists. They're not going to add to the list on the House floor. And they've already allocated their $20 million per member for all those members that asked, and they're going to leave that at that. So the next opportunity really is going to be when we're in conference between the Senate and the House bill. And there may be an opportunity on the Senate side before they get to conference, because I have spoken to some of the Senate staff, and they've said, well, we are looking at developing a process to call for projects on the Senate side but we don't want to get bogged down like they did on the House side. So they're very anxious about that. So my guess is it'll be a little bit of a black box, and we're just going to get to conference, and then the list is going to grow. And it's going to grow because the senators are going to insist on additional projects that will be added. But whether there'll be a formal process, I'm a little skeptical at this point, because there hasn't been a formal process up till now. So I think it'll be a little bit of, we need to make sure we're having these conversations behind the scenes with the correct people. And then, of course, the appropriation process is a different process than reauthorization. And the House and the Senate have not started to mark up their appropriation bills. There will be a lot of projects in the transportation appropriation bill as well. But again, Congressman Bentz didn't ask for any projects on the House side in appropriations. So if you were pending there because you're the mayor of Hood River, you're not pending actually, because he didn't submit the request. But there will be opportunities in the House and in the Senate appropriation process. And the Senate is going to start marking up its transportation bill more in July, and the House is going to start marking up their appropriations bills, particularly the transportation appropriation bill, more towards the end of June. So those appropriation earmarks will start to come out fairly soon. But again, if the request wasn't made, it's tough to get in the bill.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So it is good that Senator King is here, because we can pivot into the governance discussion with Steve Siegel. As noted in past meetings, there was a $50,000 set aside to the Joint Transportation Committee, which is a Washington legislative staff-led committee, as I understand it. And we have met with that group on at least 2 occasions. Steve Siegel, who is in attendance, has been working closely with the representative from that legal firm that is working with the Joint Transportation Committee. And before Steve starts his discussion on the governance legislation, one of the things that I continue to get pressed by people that attend these meetings is the level of detail that the members of the working group are receiving. And I think that level of detail that you are receiving is viewed positively, because these are detailed, intricate discussions. And so I certainly appreciate your patience and willingness to listen to these presentations. Steve's presentation is about 15 slides, and we want to certainly keep it open for some Q&A from the members of the working group. So my closing thought before handing it off to Steve is that this concept of a bi-state bridge compact has literally left the region. And it's kind of exciting to see that it is now being discussed and worked on in Olympia. And so again, Senator King, thank you for that. And with that is Steve. Steve, are you still with us?
I am here. I am going to share my slides, correct?
Yes, you want to, you should be able to share your screen. Yes.
I can only stay on for about 5 more minutes, and I got to get over to another committee meeting that I'm a little late for already, but I'd like to hear what Steve has to say. So I'm just going to put it on mute and disappear here in a little bit. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator King. Thank you, Hal, as well.
I also am going to stay on for a few more minutes because I'm really interested in what Steve has to say.
Can you see?
That looks good, Steve. Yep, just put it in.
Are we
There you
good?
go. Yep.
Okay, so I think Kevin's right. At some point, when you see the actual proposed legislation, there's going to be a fair amount of detail in it. This presentation is a little bit more of an overview and in kind of context setting. And to start that, we go back about a year ago when this group began looking at governance issues. And if you recall, we got into that topic primarily because of two facts. One being that there was a strong desire to have this new bridge governed by representatives from both states. And that included toll setting and regulating the use of the bridge. And it was also important that whatever entity that was regulating the bridge and setting the tolls for the bridge would also be the entity that held the debt. And while we don't have a precise number yet, one would expect that debt to be on the order of $200 or so million, so considerable debt. And so in beginning to work through those issues a year ago, we concluded that the best way to approach that would be to seek legislation creating an independent bi-state authority. We use the word bi-state authority in the memorandum of understanding. For the long-term structure, of course, the bi-state working group was created in that same MOU as the interim governance group. And the memorandum of understanding, which was, I think, adopted by all of your governing bodies, proposed that we would try to do that in the 22 session. And if that wasn't possible, we would have to try to get it done in the 23 session in order to try to achieve the overall schedule that we have for the start of construction. And we also proposed that prior to going to the legislatures, hopefully in the 22 session, we would seek supporting resolutions from each of your governing bodies. During the 21 session, we went, well, let me just back up here a second. Okay. So before I get into that, there's some terminology issues, and I will define the terms that I am using now with the understanding that as we work it through with the legislatures, these terms may change. So first of all, there's a compact. And the compact, as I'm using that term, is actually the legislation to be proposed to both states that would establish some kind of bridge commission. Here I call it the XYZ Bridge Commission. We can have a naming contest at some point. And that commission is the independent bi-state government. So the compact is the legislation, the commission is the governmental entity, and the commission will be the owner, operator, funder of the new bridge. And if you find it easier to view it this way, that commission is very much like a special district. For example, in Oregon, ORS 777 is the enabling legislation for ports. And so the compact would be the equivalent of OR 777, and the commission would be the equivalent of the Port of Hood River, but on a bi-state basis. When we looked at these issues about a year ago, we went through a number of different aspects of what the principles would be for the compact. I tried to extract from the work from last year probably the 6 major principles. If you want to view it this way, these are the objectives of what we're trying to achieve in the legislation, and not in any particular order. But first of all, we want to make sure that we provide for the bi-state decision-making on all aspects of the bridge. And keep in mind, when you write this legislation, whether you call it a compact or whatever it winds up being called, the authority of this entity is whatever that language says, no more and no less. So it has to be kind of comprehensive and detailed enough to make sure that if and when it gets enacted, that it actually provides all of the authority necessary to accomplish what we're trying to accomplish. One of the issues we're hoping for is that whatever we do with this new entity, that it is clear and transparent about what it does. This is not only important for state and local political reasons, it will also be important for the credit rating agencies and the TIFIA loan officials who would be, if there's any gaps or any lack of clarity, that could become a problem in getting a good credit rating or a TIFIA loan. We want to make sure that this new entity is separate from the local governments. And that works 2 ways. One is we want to make sure that this new entity can do its business without any kind of undue political interference from from the local governing bodies. But we also want to make sure that the local governing bodies are shielded from the liabilities of this new entity. So in more direct words, we want to make sure that if this entity borrows $200 million, that if there's a problem in repaying that, it doesn't fall back on any one of your governing bodies. And lastly, there are innumerable laws that will affect from both states that will apply to this new entity, the commission. But there are differences between the laws of both states. So the question then becomes, well, which laws apply? We'll get into that a little bit later. But these, I think, became kind of the 6 major objectives of what we would try to achieve in drafting this legislation, which I've begun to do. So if we look at kind of the more long-term schedule, meaning the next 3 years or so, of actually implementing this new entity, the overall schedule is to try to have the legislation ready to be filed for the 22 session, have that done by September of this year, 3 or 4 months from now. We would then seek by state approval of that legislation during the 22 sessions. And if approved, we would try to get the board for this new entity appointed and by the end of 22, and get the new entity into a startup mode in January of 23, and have it fully functioning by July of 23. In order to achieve that, of course, we got to get the legislation filed for the 22 session. And as you know, we went during the 21 legislative sessions, we sought legislation in both states, essentially requesting that we submit such legislation for the 22 session. And each state dealt with that in a different way. So in the state of Washington, there was legislation passed and $50,000 appropriated by the Joint Transportation Committee. And that legislation is requested that an analysis be done by an independent legal counsel, and that the conclusions of that independent analysis be presented to the Joint Transportation Committee in Washington no later than September 30th of this year. As Kevin mentioned, the JTC retained the firm that I've been working with, and they are starting from the position that first, before they look at specific legislation, they want to look at whether a compact is necessary, meaning some new by-state approved entity, or whether another form of addressing the issue should be undertaken. That other form is primarily the use of interlocal agreements, the Washington term, or intergovernmental agreements, the Oregon term. So can we do this through agreements under the existing intergovernmental interlocal agreement, or do we need to consider the creation through entirely new legislative authority of some kind of bi-state entity? In working with the attorneys for the JTC so far, I've come to the following conclusions. First of all, I don't know that this group should care what the legal form is as much as whether there is a form that can accomplish the objectives that we need, which are the ones that I mentioned earlier. And secondly, even if there was an approach taken that included an intergovernmental agreement approach, that in fact the intergovernmental agreement statutes for both states would probably have to be changed. So even if there is an intergovernmental agreement approach, it would have to be under intergovernmental agreement legislation that is slightly different than what exists today. So we're looking for some change to existing statutes. The form of that change may not matter as long as it accomplishes both objectives. Now, having said that, and after only a couple of meetings so far with the attorneys for the Joint Transportation Commission, I'm beginning to think that they are beginning to appreciate why intergovernmental agreement approach may not be the best way to go. And I've asked them if they could reach a conclusion on that by the end of July, so that if they do decide to go the intergovernmental agreement approach, we can kind of recharacterize what we're doing under that approach. But I don't think they will. So in Oregon, the approach is a bit different. There was no specific legislation regarding the governance structure for reasons that I think Kevin explained at the last meeting. But they will appoint a legislative council to work with us. We have not been able to get that going until after the 21 session ends. But working with Thorn Run Partners, it appears as though shortly after the session ends, so early July, we'll get a legislative council assigned to us, and we will begin to work on with them and on getting legislation proposed in September for Oregon. The good news, I guess, is that the deadline in Washington and the deadline in Oregon are going to be about the same. So once we get both these processes going, they will follow the same slide, the same schedule. Sorry. So when we put that all together, this is the schedule that I would propose for this group. I hope to have the first draft of the legislation that I have prepared released to everybody before the end of this month. We'll review it at the July meeting of this group. Will be a second draft by the end of July that this group will review in August. If necessary, and I'm sure I would guess it will be, there'll be a third draft of the legislation by the end of August. And we'll hope to have a final approval of that draft at the September meeting of this group. In the meantime, we'll be working with a number of other groups, including the local attorneys. We're going to have the Port Hood River General Counsel and Bond Counsel review it. Hope to have the Oregon and Washington lobbyists for the project review it, at least, if not for technical reasons, at least for political purposes. And of course, we'll be seeking your review, and to the extent you feel it's important, and it would be from my standpoint anyway, hopefully the city, your city and county councils review. Hopefully, like I said, even if it's not all the city and county councils, hopefully at least one from each state. We've talked about the legislative attorney review. We're going to submit it to the DOTs and ask for their review. They may or may not choose to have the Department of Justice getting involved in that. But I'll try to keep all of that coordinated, again, based on the schedule of the bi-state working group. And if all goes well, hopefully we have everybody in agreement and legislation submitted or ready to be submitted by the end of September. If one of the things I thought you might be interested in looking at least some of the issues, I'm not going to dive into the technical legal issues directly today. Some of those might come up next month, but start talking about for lack of the better word, the kind of the governance or political issues surrounding it. And one of those issues deal with the composition of the board. So if you went and looked at the memorandum of understanding, you would see that there were, we recommended at that time, 10 members, 10 board members, 5 from each state. 3 of the directors would be appointed by Klickitat County and Hood River County, with 1 nomination each from the city of White Salmon, the city of Bingen to Klickitat County, and the city of Hood River and the Port of Hood River to Hood River County. But we also included some state appointments. And the reason for doing that was to try to impress upon the credit rating agencies and the TIFIA loan offices that the state was involved in the process, which there's some evidence to believe that that would help with our credit ratings. And so in the MOU, we talked about the governor, each governor appointing 1, and each transportation committee from each state appointing 1 director. And also in the MOU, there was only 1 requirement on the appointments from the county, and that was that they be county residents, leaving open the possibility that the appointments to this new body could be city commissioners or city council members, sitting commissioners or council members. As we started looking through the issues surrounding the board composition, a couple of issues came up. One of which was that I think before we make any statement about the state's role, whether it's the governors or the legislative committees in the appointment process, we need further coordination with those bodies. So when right now, where the draft legislation that I'm proposing stands, right now, I would leave that blank to be inserted at a later time when we get a little further along with our coordination. The other issue I would raise, and this is something certainly for this body to think about and discuss, is whether or not we should prohibit appointments of city and county board members to this group. And of course, the reason to think about that is to make clear the separation between this entity and the city and county themselves. There are lots of examples where there is a prohibition, and there are examples where it's allowed if you do a search of what's occurred throughout the country. So right now, we don't need to decide, but it is one of those issues that we might want to discuss as we look at the proposed legislation. In terms of the board procedures, the memorandum of understanding did not address any of this. The proposed legislation needs to address this. It can address this simply by saying, we'll leave it up to the board of this new entity to decide. But more often than not, in other examples, these kind of issues were addressed in the enabling legislation. Again, I don't, there is no need to try to decide this at this moment, but I do intend, unless told otherwise, to include something along these lines in the first draft, recognizing that there's plenty of time over the next few months to change this depending on the decisions of this group, and also what we hear from the Joint Transportation Committee in Washington and Legislative Council in Oregon. The other issue that will come up is the organization of the commission. So this is, how is it staffed? What level of staffing? Those kind of issues. And in the draft that I am going to propose to you by the end of the month, I only propose the 2 positions for the commission in the legislation, one being an executive director, one being a legal counsel, and then go on to say that the rest of how this entity gets organized is left to the discretion of the board of this commission. So the board would have we will grant the board the power to hire or contract with whoever they choose under rules that the board itself would create for itself. And that could include having this new entity enter into agreements with the DOTs, city or counties, or Port Hood River for any of its functions. So that would all be left to the discretion of this new board, but it would have the authority to do so. In terms of the powers of the commission, there'll be a long list that gets pretty specific in the draft enabling legislation. But I would probably sum it up as saying that this board would have the power to do anything that it's necessary or relates to owning, operating, designing, constructing, financing the bridge. It will be enabled to borrow for any purpose of the commission, the purpose being the bridge, without voter consent, but or the consent of any other government. But borrowing, it will only be payable from the receipts of the commission. It will have no authority to levy any tax or a fee except for the tolls or any fee it might charge for the use of the bridge. It will be exempt from taxation, similar to what a city in Oregon or Washington would be, and that does mean that it will be subject to any sales tax in Washington related to the construction of the bridge. It's tempting to try to exempt this bridge from sales taxation in Washington, but if you look at, for example, the Comb River Crossing project and now the I-5 project, that bridge will be subject to sales taxation in the state of Washington. And I didn't think we should do anything different than what the DOTs are doing for themselves. Lastly, I wanted to just quickly to discuss which laws apply to the commission. Obviously, there's legal aspects to this. But there's political aspects to this, and that's why I thought perhaps this group would want to think about it a little bit. Because obviously all federal laws will apply to this new entity. The compact, when it's enacted, is in fact state law in Oregon and Washington, so it will apply. But there'll be a whole lot of other state laws that will also apply, go down the list. Public meetings law, public records law, public contracting law, a whole slew of them, and they are different between Oregon and Washington. Most of them are a little different, not really different in objective, although they have slightly different legal requirements, but some are fundamentally different. Tort liability being a case in point. There's a substantial difference between the tort liability laws affecting municipal corporations in Oregon versus Washington. So what you'll see is a scheme that I propose about these other applicable state laws. I think you should consider whether they make sense, but the way I tried to approach it was to say that for almost all matters, the applicable state law other than the compact would be the state law, the laws of the state where the principal headquarters office of the commission is initially located. And that would not change even if the headquarters office is later relocated. So if this new entity establishes its principal headquarters in Oregon, then for the most part, the laws of Oregon would apply. Again, public meetings, public records, budgeting, and the like. Or if it was in Washington, it would be the Washington laws. However, actions, and I couldn't come up with a better way to explain it, that are location specific, meaning real estate transactions, land use, building code, those would be covered by the law where the location specific action is located. So if this entity is trying to purchase land property in the state of Washington, it would be under Washington law. Lastly, while we're not focusing for the moment on a public-private partnership, I do propose that this entity have the authority to undertake a public-private partnership if that's the way it decides to pursue the project. And the public-private partnership authority in the state of Washington is unclear. The public-private partnership authority in Oregon relating to local governments was also unclear. But in the 2017 legislative session, the Port Hood River secured specific and express and clear authority to undertake the bridge as a P3 project if it so chose. What I propose for this new entity is that it have the same authority to pursue a P3 project, again, if it decides to do that, that it would have the same authority as the authority provided to the Porterhood River under Oregon law. And so that is the only case where this proposed enabling legislation actually specifies a specific existing state law. So again, in about by the end of the month, we will be sending out the enabling, an initial draft of the proposed enabling legislation. It'll be, give or take, 15 pages long. It'll be pretty specific in certain places where I think it needs to be specific. I anticipate that over the next 3 months, that legislation will change. The language will change, maybe even the form of the legislation will change considerably. And as it proceeds, we'll keep on bringing it back to the Bi-State Working Group for your review and comment. With that, I'll stop and stop the sharing and see if there's any questions.
Thank you, Steve. Any questions for Steve's presentation? I guess I would just start things off just from an administrative perspective. I don't think it was in your schedule, Steve, but that as the local agencies, if they want to have their council review the draft legislation, that would need to be back to you by July 9th.
Yeah, one of the things I was hoping for, and again, if it's possible, if it's not, it's not, is that we get the initial review by any attorneys a little bit earlier. And I think July 9th was the date, so that we could have those reviews available before the next meeting of this group. And frankly, one of the things I'm concerned about is so far, I'm the only technical person that's been looking at what I've been drafting, and there's quite a bit there. There's quite a bit, I'm sure, that needs discussion, and I'd like to have some of that discussion on a technical legal level out of the way before this group started discussing it. Now, the really good thing from my perspective is by having this legal counsel retained by the Joint Transportation Committee of Washington, I've begun a lot of that discussion. And as a drafter of this, I have to say, it makes me very concerned when I'm the only one that's looked at it. And I need other people to tell me when, God, that just doesn't make sense, or.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. I think Senator King has his hand up.
I do, and thank you. I was able to get back on because my 3 o'clock turned out to be at 3:30. So I appreciate the presentation Steve made. If it was possible, I'd love to get a copy of those slides. Would appreciate that. I'm wondering. We're working diligently to try and get what I would call the Washington half of this bridge put into a package, so that funding is there. And I'm talking in the neighborhood of $150 million. My assumption here is that the bridge is about a $350 million bridge. And that we're going to have some money come in from tolls and hopefully maybe a little money from the feds. And between Oregon and Washington, we could have this bridge pretty well funded without having to get loans to pay for it. That's a goal, and we'll see where it goes. I just mentioned that. I'm curious, and I want to look through the slides again, but the putting a state representative from both Oregon and Washington on the commission, whether they're voting members or non-voting members would be a question I have, because in talking to both, well, I've mainly talked to the state of Washington, but I believe, and I couldn't tell you who, I've been told that Oregon does not want to have any ownership in this bridge, and I know for a fact Washington does not want to have any ownership of this bridge. So I'm curious as to whether we really need to have voting members from each state on there, but that's just a thought. And then my last comment would be P3s in the state of Washington have not always been held in great light, and that's possibly because of a previous leader in the House that has stepped down and has so we have a new majority leader in the House, but he has always been pretty adamant about not using P3s. He feels like it increases the cost about 10% if you do that. Anyway, look forward to seeing the slides and appreciate the presentation and the thought that you put into it. I think it's a good basis on which to keep moving forward. So, Stephen, thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Now I do have to go.
Thank you, Senator. I'll be sure to get those slides to you.
Thank you very much.
I have a question
Yes, Betty.
for Steve. So for legal counsel, you put city/county. So would it be best if the county's legal counsel reviewed that and not so much our own local city attorney?
I guess I would say probably yes, because the counties are involved in the nominating process, so that we got to make sure that we're clear with them. But I will also say the more the better, right? And so I'm not trying to dissuade any not to use city council, city attorneys, but certainly the counties would be at a minimum, I think.
Okay, great, thank you.
I have a question for Steve. The document for the attorneys to review, when would we be able to have that, to give that to them?
June 25th.
Thank you.
My only recommendation, if you are thinking about sharing it with your individual counsel, I did this with Jerry Jakes here at the port. I called him and let him know that that was coming down the pike, so he could maybe set some time aside. I found that our attorney doesn't like things dropped on him at the last second.
Kevin,
Yes.
I've got a couple of quick questions for Steve. Steve, I'm not sure how to ask this, but the Pacifica Law Group that we met with, you're working with, in effect, does their legal opinion and their input, can we consider that to be reflect the Department of Justice's review, the Washington DOJ?
No.
Or is that a wholly separate path?
Totally separate. Yep.
And would the Washington DOJ path go through WashDOT?
Well, WashDOT, if Yes, I mean, one way to get there is to have WashDOT make a request to the DOJ to review it. And ODOT as well.
Right. And then back to the lawyer from the Pacific Law Group, at least originally being more predisposed towards an interlocal agreement. Do you see any difference from an underwriting standpoint, whether it's an interlocal or a bi-state compact of some sort?
Well, first of all, if I were a betting man, I will bet they will move away from wanting to do a bi-state agreement. I can't guarantee that, obviously, but we've had a conversation. We're going to have another one tomorrow, and I think they begin to see the same thing I saw, which is it's just too hard to do it that. Yes, you can get there, but you're going to change a whole bunch of laws anyway. Why not make it easier and put them all together in one specific piece of legislation? So I think they will get there. That said, I do believe there will be a difference. I don't know that it's a fatal difference or not, but I think the clarity of the whole legal structure is a major factor that will be considered. And if you have all the legislation together in one place, one section of the state statutes that's kind of comprehensive and clear, it is much easier to follow than if you start stringing together a series of agreements. Michael, as you know, I've reviewed, I've written a lot of those agreements between the states. I've reviewed for other projects. I've reviewed legal opinions by both DOJ attorneys and by private attorneys representing private entities that wanted to submit P3 proposals. And every one of them says something to the effect, we think this works, but it would sure be good to have specific legislation. And so, we want to avoid that to the extent possible.
Great, thank you.
Any other comments or thoughts? I will be sure to follow up with all of you on just coordinating that legislation and making sure it's in a user-friendly format for your council to review. All right. All right, not hearing no further questions on the governance. Steve, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time. We're coming up on, well, we're at that 3:30 mark. I did include a written report on the project update, so I'm not going to read that to you, just a couple of items. You may be receiving invitations as part of Section 106 partners related to the NEPA project as consulting party members in reviewing impacts to historic structures and archaeological structures. So you may be getting an invite soon for that effort. The Port, Klickitat County, and the City of White Salmon will also be receiving letters shortly. They are referred to as 4F letters and will need administrative concurrence, primarily on the Washington side, that the proposed riverfront park, it would not be adversely affected by the bridge, or we would be incorporating that park into the bridge replacement. And let's see, I think that, in working with the build funders, it's been a very labor intensive and a lot of hurry up and wait getting responses back from the build team. It would not surprise me if the Washington State legislative funds are actually made available before the build funds are available. And staff has been indicating that it may make sense to tee up a owner's representation project management contract and RFP process that could help the bi-state working group and the project set up priorities as this project generates additional funds, and to keep the effort moving in a positive format while we wait for the build approvals for geotech and engineering. I also included a copy of the July project update in your packet. I would encourage you to send those to whoever prepares your local government packet. Feel free to include that in your own commission and council packets, just to help keep communication open. And if for some reason there's an opportunity for me to come and present any aspect of this project to your commission or council, I am always available. But aside from that, I think that covers everything that I had in your packet. So with that, are there any other thoughts or closing comments before we adjourn this meeting? Commissioner Babbitts.
I have a quick question. I know several of us are meeting with Senator Merkley on Friday, and I just want to be clear on the vocabulary. I understand we're basically asking him for an earmark, but can someone help us with the language of what we're looking? Yeah. Maybe if we get the vocabulary more accurate, we have a little better chance. I know it's not that important. The wording isn't that important, but can you help us with the language?
Absolutely. Commissioner, would you like me to send you an email like by the end of the day with just some talking points?
Yes, send it to myself and to Bob. I think we're both in the meeting with him on Friday.
Excellent. I'll go ahead and copy the balance of the members just so they have those for their use as well. Great. Thank you.
Kevin, if you could send that to me too, I'm going to try and make that meeting. I'm not 100% if I'm going to be able to, but I'm going to try to.
Excellent.
And Kevin, I wanted to thank you for that really great update. It was really thorough, and I sent it on to staff to distribute to the rest of our city council because I thought it was a really good picture of where we are right now. Thanks.
You're welcome. And I guess before we leave, I just wanted to say a big thank you to Commissioner Benton. Bob, I guess this is going to be your last meeting, as I understand it, and also John Everett, who's not in, but this will be his last meeting as well. So thank you for your active involvement.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think that's incorrect information. So I'm going to be here.
Oh, you are? Okay.
Where you heard that? Yeah.
Okay. Well, my
I'm
apologies.
not hanging around it. Yeah. No.
I swear it
The
wasn't
rumors
me.
of your demise are.
Yep. No, it's no problem.
Okay. Excellent. Glad to hear you're going to be around.
Kevin, can I ask one more question? I'm sorry. So several of us had discussions with Congressman Bentz, and obviously we all brought up the bridge with him, and he chose not to put that on an earmark list. And I know Bob and I both had discussions where it seemed like he is taking that he believes it's a principled view that he opposes the process, therefore is not attempting to use the process. Do we know if that's something that other congressmen have been doing, or are we simply lucky enough to have one congressman who is not interested in playing the earmark game? Can anyone fill us in on this? I was pretty baffled by. I can certainly understand his opposition to the program. I was more surprised by him not willing to put anything on the list.
Well, I can't specifically speak to other congressional districts around the nation. I gathered in prior discussions with Hal that he was not the only one. I can maybe ask for more quantifiable backup to that assertion.
Could you ask Hal? Because I'm just curious. I didn't get a chance to ask when Hal was speaking, but if you could give us some insight into that, that might help us understand whether it's worth working on him or not. if every Republican congressman in the area has done this, then we're not going to win. But if he's sort of standing out alone, it would be helpful to know that.
Well, in case in point, Jamie Herrera Butler did submit the request. So I will only say that, as a new congressman, he is charged with staffing up his office. And I don't know, maybe you have more current data as to whether he's got a local field office set.
Yeah, he's fully staffed. He took over most of Walden's staff, and
Gotcha.
He's really fully staffed, and they're working. They're completely up to speed, and it's clear that he was familiar with the issue. We talked to him about it. Bob, why don't you jump in and could you fill in on the discussion you had with him about corporate taxes and the relationship?
Yeah, well, he called up and asked, what kind of things does Hood River County need? What are our priorities? And I basically just started with the bridge and said, this is our biggest need by far. And his response was, well, how much corporate tax do you think we should be paying, or, should pay for that? And so it really was kind of awkward, and it was, our conversation didn't really move forward very well after that point. And we talked about several, opportunities at the federal government level, but it seemed like he was pretty, he was just speaking exclusively to the infrastructure bill at that time. So this new one, this one that got passed, which I understand is much smaller and whatever. I mean, the only thing I have heard that I would mention is the discussions in the House. Apparently, if the Republicans were very opposed to it. I think that they voted or against it or something. And then, or were going to, but then a lot of them were very excited to tell their constituents about the earmarks they got. And so, but there were a few Republicans that decided, if I'm not going to vote for it, I'm not going to take the earmarks. I'm going to get with it at the same time and brag about them. So my gut is it's more of a principled approach, but it is unfortunate that we're kind of being, we're not seeing a benefit from that approach. Who knows? He has a big district. I'm sure he would have a lot of projects that would have asked. I'm sure that there's not a lack of requests, given the size of his district. So I don't know, but yeah, I definitely was getting some principle pushback in my discussion.
I'm just hoping that our friends in other congressional districts understand it's not that we simply ignored this,
Right.
and you guys are doing your work and we're just sort of letting this fall. This is where, it's important that you understand that we're working on this, but we tried, but this is what the result is.
I'll be following up on that. So check your email shortly within the next 24 hours. All right. Well, I don't hear anything else. So everybody, thank you very much. Appreciate your involvement. And so we actually have a preordained, preset meeting for next month, which I believe is July 12th. So enjoy your holiday break, and I will be keeping in touch with you, but we will reconvene July 12th, and have a wonderful July 4th if I don't see you before then. Thank you, everybody.